Welcome, Jennifer Michael Hecht. It's wonderful to see you, and welcome to the Seekers Forum.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. I'm really enjoying your book, The Wonder Paradox. And I wanted to start off with this quote, which struck me. You said, "We live in paradoxes. We feel permanent, though we're aware of death. The consciousness paradox is the startling fact that soft matter afloat in a bone bowl made Mozart's sonatas, Shakespeare's plays, and the whole astounding modern world." That's a mouthful. Can you just start by talking about what you mean by the wonder paradox?
Yeah, I think it's good to start with paradox. The word means truth is the dox part, the thing that's just true. It's a fact. And the para is these two are next to each other, but won't come together. They don't fit. They are opposites, but both are true. And that is, it's a definition that you can stretch too far in any direction so that the meaning disappears. But we kind of understand that in the middle here, there's some things that really stretch the imagination. For instance, galaxies. There are billions of galaxies. And then you go to the nano, the small, that in itself it's a paradox that we live in one tiny scale of time and space, and yet feel so very important and are so very important because we're the universe's consciousness to the extent that we know we really do matter tremendously because we are thinking about it. So what I mean about the wonder paradox is that it's the consciousness paradox that I think always steals the show in a certain way. I always like to say that consciousness is stranger than virgin birth, that the religions were just trying to get as weird as what life and death and galaxies and consciousness, the idea that the meat thinks, as you were quoting, this goo, a couple of pounds, and it lasts for such a short time. And the idea has to be handed on to the next ball of goo. And yet somehow it all, here we are. So our situation as conscious beings made out of meat that want to be immortal and have ambitions to all sorts of permanence and yet disappear. All these paradoxes, the top paradox for me becomes the wonder paradox, the idea that we could have evolved as material beings, so full of awe, so full of wonder, that we can look up at the sky and be so moved. What is that? And it's the reason that science isn't enough. We live in the human world. We experience the science, we have feelings about it. The science is hugely important to me, but poetry is what takes in everything.
And how does poetry do that? How does poetry open us to that numinous space between the polarities?
Yeah. Well, I'll first say that I'm asking us to think poetically about our lives. So in part, I don't just mean poems, but I'll move on to how poems do it. But if we only have a science box and a religion box, where does love go? We need a poetry. You could call it a lot of different things, but there are problems with all sorts of things, and poetry, I think, came to me through the poems as the way to look at this thing. So now we'll turn to how poems do it. And poetry, I think its business is paradox. It's like I used to call, when I gave talks, stand-up epiphany, because what you're trying to do is help people to remember how strange the situation is. And why do we want to remember how strange it is? Well, for one thing, our brains and our lives and capitalism seem to really concentrate us on other things, on normalizing a kind of desire treadmill, right? Just what is life? I don't know. Let's want things. the most spiritual we get in a certain way is family. So one of the things my book notices is that religion's holidays meant something. So one holiday was about shame and another holiday was about renewal. And because of that, I think that's my dog lapping up water in the background.
No problem.
Because of that, we got a lot of needs met. It's funny that you don't even have to believe that much to because I've been a Jewish person in a Yom Kippur a congregation, and I know a lot of the people there don't believe. They're there for family, they're there for tradition, and yet as we stand there saying we're sorry, and of course you're moved, and of course you move to try to have fewer things to say you're sorry about. So I strayed a little bit there, but I'll try to come back. Right. So I'll come back in this way, that one of my suggestions is that you pick a poem for holidays, the ones that you celebrate. I'm really not telling anybody to do anything new. I'm more sort of reading what we're doing, and I read it as great. All it needs is a little self-awareness. I call us the interfaithless, because the inter is the important part. There's a lot of us out there in our own little traditions doing our puja ceremonies or our temple ceremonies or church ceremonies. And we know that the others are out there, but I don't think we take a moment to feel that. And I think everything we do for our inner lives, from museums to listening to music alone to outdoor everything we do to make life feel beautiful and strong, we don't think to connect all that and say, I have a poetic life. Because in the past, the word spiritual suggests you believe in spirits. Now, it wouldn't have to. I could have rehabilitated that word, and I rehabilitated sacred because I couldn't do without it, and because the word exists before religion takes it, comes out of the idea of a treaty. But most of these words do. Liturgy in ancient Greek society and into Roman society meant the holidays and celebrations that the rich in each area had to do according to state law for the good of the community. It's Christianity that then takes it. So when we use it, we're not just translating from religion. We're looking at human needs and seeing that lately, a lot of them have been taken care of by religion. And if you leave religion because you don't believe, you're doing without. You're doing without community, ritual, and meditation. Or you're doing it in this little piecemeal way, which is fantastic. All we need is the sort of consciousness of community to remember that there's something, real that binds us.
And wonder is part of that binding. It's part of that awareness of the interfaithlessness.
Absolutely.
of
And
us
wonder
all.
is the job of poetry, which I realized I didn't really speak enough to. So poetry can be very long, but the modern lyric poem, and even the way we experience the epics, because we tend to take little parts out, the modern poem is a page or two. It's been created with the idea that it would repay many, many readings. If it gets to you in a world anthology, many, many people have carried it around in their pockets as a dear friend by the time it got to that anthology. And so you can trust it. Not everyone's gonna, ring your chimes, but one will. And it will, because poetry makes it its business of reminding us of scale, time. Often, it'll talk about the gigantic time difference that we know from science. and it can do that in all sorts of little ways. You can mention a dinosaur, you can mention a star, you can do all sorts of things to get people. You mention a star and an atom, and people's subconscious does a lot of the work. You, in a poem, you want to move someone or communicate in some way. And so they tend to be, they're like whispers in your ear. They're intimate. Because of the brevity, they feel a little like prayers. So they sort of slot into the way a lot of us have, at least at one point in our lives, found wonder in an idea of the supernatural. But I just feel very strongly that I accept nothing supernatural, and that I find nature outrageously super. I've never put it that way before, but
super enough.
It's super enough.
You say poetry makes up for the loss of the supernatural, which I thought was a beautiful way of saying that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm certainly not the first person to make the observation. I quote Wallace Stevens in the intro to the book, and it's essentially once one has lost faith in God, one switches to belief in poetry, or this is even stronger, sort of leaning on poetry. And I think that, I mean, I've read the essays, and that quote or idea from him comes up in, and he means the same kinds of things I do, all of the arts, but also specifically lyric poetry. There's something in all the arts that strains towards the ineffable, the sublime. It's funny that when they reach it, we often call them poetry. It's a poem. You know, if somebody serves you something it's a poem. Why? Because we think of a poem as this tiny balanced thing that somehow holds together on its own. And yeah, so our experience with poetry has been claimed by Stevens and many others. Neruda talks about it. Neruda's poetry is full of Catholic imagery, because Catholic imagery is gorgeous. You know, it's so ornate and rich, and, you know, the color of blood and the feel of velvet, and it's the candlelights and everything. It's a hard one to walk away from. And poets with Catholic backgrounds tend to give us gorgeous versions of that, struggling towards making sense of what is true. And that's what matters to me. I know for some other people, the feeling of imagining a supernatural, you know, go to it. But you know, and I've certainly talked to many people who said they believed in God, but for them, God is love. And we don't disagree in any way. Right. It's just that for me, it's really important not to use words that are sometimes used by other people to mean the supernatural. So I won't do it. And every time I say sacred in the book, I say poetic sacred. Every time I say liturgy, I say cultural liturgy, because I'm trying to make really clear. But I think once we all know what we're talking about, we can use these words freely, because in anthropology and sociology already, a little to my surprise, it's really getting established that sacred means what people hold sacred.
Right. So let's get back to the idea of paradox, which is so lacking in our culture. We live in such a binary, dualistic, black or white culture. I'd like to talk about how polarization and binary thinking conspires against an appreciation of paradox, and how that diminishes our lives.
Wow, yeah. I think paradox can be very frightening. It's not easy. Like, you know, the brain doesn't like to do, it has different areas, right? I've read these recent neurological books, and the brain doesn't want to do the hard work. And paradox is always a kind of hard work to really think about. But thinking about paradox and getting friendly with it takes the pain away very fast, because it's interesting. It's interesting somehow. It's one of those things when you're thinking about it, when you're really doing it, you know you're doing something important. That feeling matters. In general, the way I understand things is that feelings matter. They don't matter to the point that they overcome rational thought, but there's no real separation between those two. So you have to be really careful. And you asked about paradox and how we are sort of trained against it. You know, I think that life and death in themselves are the greatest paradox. When you've known someone incredible and inexpressibly interesting and they disappear from the universe, it is the paradox. How could a creature so ornate not be so, and this rock's still here? It strikes us so deeply that isn't logical when it happens, and yet it just is. It just is. And the reverse. 2 people are in the room, and then a few screams later, 3 people are in the room, and one of them turns out to be who knows who. What is going on? It is unbelievable. And yet it is the fact. The death one terrifies people. Right now, it's an interesting dichotomy. I'll just put it this way. As the Victorians were scared of sex, but had a death memorial culture and lived with it, we're fine with sex and terrified of death. We put our meat in, we make sure the blood's not on it, put it in cellophane. It's an old observation at this point that we are living in a moment that really hides death from itself. Funeral parlors used to be in the parlor of your house. That was how it worked. But once, people weren't living in that way anymore, they didn't have parlors. So you offset it. But after a while, people have no, and we lose deathbed scenes. Those were something to look forward to. You know what I mean? You could really shock people, tell all your secrets. It was something, and people would worry about the deathbed scene. Will she tell? Anyway, I'm off on a tangent. But yeah, I think that we're scared of death, and the great paradox is life and death. And when we think about it, we are liberated from a lot of petty things. We start to get that very big feeling. It's funny that you can do it without great contemplation by putting yourself on a mountaintop and you see a big scene. Same thing happens to you. You get this perspective shift where the tiny things you were angry about are just gone. And when you're in that space, you tend to love people more, or maybe less. I mean, it's a big emotional liminal space that you can enter through recognizing that our lives, the way we live them, is somewhat in conflict with the situation, but that's not anything that you can cure. I think it's important to have a simple life and be able to write a book and have children. You can't do those things if you're just a seeker. Life teaches us humility in all its own ways through all these paths, and nobody escapes it. So I think when life changes on you in a drastic way, if you haven't been thinking about these things, it's terribly painful. It's painful even if you have been thinking about these things, but at least you have a voice in your head that says, remember, you were just saying yesterday changes everything. Everything changes. Well, now this is strange. I mean, it's rough. It's rough out there. Yeah.
It also seems to me like there's a widespread conspiracy against dialectical thinking, against both and. Everything is either or. And people are, it scares them, just like death scares them, mystery scares them, ambiguity scares.
Right.
The fact that 2 things can be true at the same time is terrible.
That's right.
To the
That's
rational
right.
mind.
Right. Keats's letter to his brother about Shakespeare. He says, he calls it negative capability,
Yeah.
I know that you know it because you were almost quoting it there. Yeah. Where he says, that the great thinker like Shakespeare is someone who can hold two opposing truths in their mind without a nervous rushing to somehow solve it. And it is really hard to do, but the way poets do it is by, for instance, putting down two thoughts that somehow chime or reverberate with each other and creating a meaning space between them.
Yes.
Seeing what happens when you put two things down that don't necessarily fit, but that for some reason are calling to each other for you. You have to trust, you have to trust those impulses. And then, as I always say to my writing students, once you scare yourself, now you have something. You don't have anything in a poem if you sat down to write it. It never happens. Ask any poet. It's just not what happens. What happens is you sit down and write your idea, what you thought was going to be the poem, and then you end up working on it over and over and over and over. Even my simplest poems made major transformations in some ways. Even the ones that feel like they came out in whole cloth when I look down. No. How do you survive a conversation where there is no attempt to get to a singular answer? And I do think you can set that up, and poetry does by its very nature. We expect poems to make sense, but in a complex way. For instance,
or stop making sense.
Right. Stop making sense. Absolutely. Because how do you get to a new idea? Nobody knows, right? It's like, it's everything we think about tells us that we can only draw on what we already know. And yet we've come up with all this stuff. So how does it happen? And I think, this liminal space you put yourself in, where you allow yourself an impulse and then stay with it. But inventors keep inventing, right? They get into an inventing mind. It's about learning to look for certain kinds of feelings. And, I think inventors, maybe we all know this, they wait for any time that they curse during the day because something's frustrating. Well, invent something for that. You keep dropping your cup, make a cup holder. But you have to turn that on and notice and think of it as your job and your capacity to do it. Well, poets are doing that with words, and it takes a long, long time to figure out. I was going to say something like line readings. Poems often have sentences in them, but you are also invited by poetry to read each line as its own meaning. And sometimes these have, it creates a field of meaning in just that one sentence. Because of the line breaks, you're reading three sentences, three packages of meaning, and then the sentence itself. So that's four. That's one of the ways that poets create, create density. To make it so that you can reread this over and over and over and find new things. And I certainly do. Whatever I think, the first time I read a poem, I often have no idea why I liked it. I don't know what it means. And then I read it again and again and again. And after a while, it reads like it's conversational, but I have to get there.
Right. Your book is so full of awe, and there's so much science now being generated around awe. And the definition of awe is in general that you encounter something that your existing structures of your mind can't contain in some way, whether it's conceptual, visual. But the absence of awe, leads to depression. It leads to all kinds of, declines in fitness and health. Abraham Joshua Heschel has a great quote I love. He says, "We are shocked by the weakness of our awe, but also by the weakness of our shock."
Mm.
Can you tell me a little bit about why awe matters to our wellness and to our thriving?
Yeah, I myself was quite surprised to find that just as my book came out, a couple of books had come out or were coming out about the science of awe, which I really didn't know anything about. I really didn't go into this as, oh, I'm studying wonder at all. That just became the title, and it became obvious that it was a deep thread in the book. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of poetry and religion. So I was surprised by these books on awe, and one of the ones told me, yes, certainly how profoundly it seems to affect health. You really can create the moment. You can do something similar to meditation, to long sittings of meditation by moments of awe. And that sounds right to me. I have done a lot of meditation. I know that it has its own thing. It's not the exact thing as anything else. But yes, the way awe and wonder can stop you, change your perspective, give you a sense of oneness. That seems to be part of it. Awe is part of transcendence, and transcendence is the name we've given to a very strange experience, which most of us have only a few times in our whole lives, and yet affect our whole lives. I mean, I've talked to people who said that they went to a church camp in 1977 and they've believed ever since because of one moment that night was real enough. And other people have had that experience with all sorts of other things. Music is a big one. And I'd have written about music, but because I think music can get you to transcendence faster than poetry. It's just that you also need poetry because you need to be able to talk about it. There are specific ideas that need to be that need to be addressed because they're real, and that put music in a kind of perspective. But yeah, in terms of getting there, some of the other arts can, maybe dance, especially if you're a dancer. I would imagine, anything that throws the body into it. But for me, it's poetry for all the accidental reasons that things happen. And specifically, tell me what you asked again.
You answered it beautifully.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just curious, as an aside, how do you differentiate transcendence from the supernatural?
Yeah, that's, I think, been the problem all along. And I don't know that I've ever seen anyone do it before. What I mostly see is atheists ignoring the fact that people have this experience by just saying, oh, that's just a bodily experience. Well, everything I know and feel is just a bodily experience. Even my reaction to science, even the scientists go home and don't know why their daughter won't talk to them. We all live in a human world. And, yeah, with our white coats on, we can explain attraction in terms of symmetry of face. So you're a good breeding partner, but that's not how it plays in real life. And so it seems to me that if there's a very consistent human experience, it has a reality to it. Doesn't mean it's good, doesn't mean we have to keep it, but it has a kind of reality to it that we can talk about in this space between facts and nonsense. We can talk about all the things that are true, but not touchable, not measurable, but they are facts in the human experience. And we see some things that humans do that we say, I'm not even including that. That's a real outlier. There are some really consistent things that human beings experience, and transcendence is one of them. We could call it by, dopamine. We can try to say the science part of it, but that just, no matter how much we know, it doesn't take away the fact of it. And when we experience it, we feel very happy and very much without edges. We feel one with everything. It's just part of the definition. It's what everybody comes back from and says. I had an encounter with awe. I was momentarily transformed such that I felt like another type of being.
Mhm.
If if almost everybody has one of those in life, we have to start talking about it as a real thing in the human experience. And I always want more. It's not something you can pull a lever for, but poetry sets up all the conditions for it.
Yes, yes. I was just let's move on to living the questions and loving the questions. You mentioned Rilke's great quote about loving the questions. How does that change the way we live and the way we approach our experience and our love of this experience?
Yeah. When I wrote my book Stay, which is a secular argument against suicide, I came up with the idea of the future self, that your future self probably doesn't want you to kill yourself, and your past self, got through an awful lot of hard times for yourself now. You should be grateful to your past self. You should notice that you know a lot more than that person knew 20 years ago, and trust that the person you're going to be 20 years from now is going to have some answers you don't have. I think we just don't have that notion in our culture, that there's a future self who you're doing this for and who will be grateful. There's just so much evidence of it. So living the questions means saying, okay, answers aren't even the goal. Rilke says you may live into some answers, and yeah, you may, love and building some stable things or having some amazing memories. It does give you some answers, some sense of, what, this made sense. There's a poem that says, and did you get what you want? I think it's Chandler. Raymond Chandler. No, I'm thinking the wrong person. And did you get what you want anyway?
Isn't that Mary Oliver? Oh, maybe not.
I think so, that one. I just have it associated with a man. And did you get what you want anyway? Because there was a sense of having sort of ruined it, having not. So I'm thinking of Raymond Carver. Raymond Chandler kept coming in my mind. I'm thinking Raymond Carver, maybe. Carver. In any case, the quote is, and did you get what you want anyway? And the answer is yes. And what did you want? To love and be loved, and that's quite a thing. But to want answers, for one thing, it really just is such a capitalist kind of idea. It just is, because you can't sell the sort of curious and unknown, and you can't sell the transcendent, really, because it's about the not selling. It's about not seeing each other as economic units. How can you, once you're in that other space, where you realize, that it's, and now I won't be able to remember this guru's name who said, we're all just walking each other home.
Was it Ram Dass?
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's been a long day for me already. So names start to go. But yes, we're all just walking each other home. I mean, I think everybody, most people, as they get older, start to see how much struggle other people are in, no matter what face they show to the world. And it does soften you, and it does make you think, you're lucky to get in. You're lucky to have gotten any life at all. And none of us are paying enough attention to the moment we're in. You don't have to crave more at the other end, and there's the meaning question too. I think that in other cultures, losing religion doesn't necessarily mean losing God, because in other religions, God was not the source and control of all meaning. There wasn't a God that was that. And so losing the gods wouldn't make you think, why would the meaning go anywhere? And really think about it. How could God having some meaning make sense of this chaos and anguish that we see? How could meaning exist outside of that? And what would it matter if some being was up there watching us and holding something called meaning? I really feel that human beings actually can get by on a very simple answer, and they got by on God knows, its meaning is God. And it hurts when you take away God because it looks like you're taking away meaning. But God never had meaning. The meaning was always between us. The meaning was always here. The meaning of the ritual was to remind us what time of year it is, to help us translate our feelings, to help us become a married person, to help us realize we have a child who it's sort of a magical thing that 9 people in a family are sharing their riches, and one of them has a baby, and that one is now in for a full share. How else could you somehow come in and get a full it's amazing how, and that baby ceremony is sort of part of that, showing all the old people, here's this person and they're the next generation and they're part of us. The God stuff and the supernatural stuff is where we've put some of the poetry about motherhood and parenthood. So when we lose religion, even if we have a party welcoming the baby, we might not have a moment of awe set up unless we have a poem, but people are already doing it. One of the things that inspired me to write the book was how people are doing weddings, funerals, and to a lesser degree, baby welcoming ceremonies, that poems have just appeared at these things. And I sometimes hear people say, oh, this poem sort of a cliche for this event. And I desperately want to turn that into cultural liturgy, for us to see that if a certain E. Cummings poem is popular right now, even if we all know it was in a movie and we all fell in love with it there's no reason not to use that to say, look at all the cultural capital and actual capital that went into making that poem hit. Take the assist. And it's wonderful if we're all using the same poem, because in so many other ways we hate each other these days. The algorithm books scare the heck out of me. And then I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter, for instance, but I'll go there and see the few things up in the corner, and I'll click on one, and 2 minutes later, I'm outraged about something. Outrage is all they produce. And the feeling feels kind of good, but I also have a strong feeling that I need to act to somehow punish someone, all those feelings. And then I shut off the box and walk away and say, I don't want that outrage. And I'm not really the keeper of this issue. I've just been drawn in, and because I read those algorithm books, I kind of know why. So right now, we're in a kind of terrible moment in terms of polarity, in terms of us not feeling like we're all Americans, for instance, and certainly not that we're all humans. And we need to address it, and certainly the loss of religion is a loss of one more place where we could have, people hate each other. I mean, even armies stop fighting on Christmas Eve if they all will leave a little bit, or just believe in the idea that at this moment is sacred for some human reason, even if they don't believe anything else. So for a lot of reasons, the good things that we're doing are worth keeping and worth thinking about, and worth asking ourselves, what part of this holiday does give me a sense of awe? and
Mm.
keeping that part,
Mm.
and building a little ritual around the things that already give you awe. But mostly I'm just saying the things you already go to, the things you already do, a
Mhm.
lot of them fit together as a poetic life, and they fit together with reading poems, because poems remind you of how precious life is, and how well, I don't want to start with how. I want to say that the hardest thing to remember is that there are really other minds out there,
Mhm. Mhm.
and a poem really helps you see it. So does film sometimes, I think, but we don't all see the same film. But when we do feel a certain kind of unity over it.
Mhm.
I think, when there's something great out there that everybody seems to love, there's a sense that, okay, maybe we are one. And I think that we have poems like that. We just have to give them just a little bit more attention.
Absolutely. You write a lot about ritual in the book, and you've mentioned it today. Can you give me an example of how ritual helps us to cope with paradox?
Yeah. How ritual helps us to cope with paradoxes. Certainly, ritual gets us to notice it. It's funny that something that's so painful, when you don't look at it, gets kind of funny and wonderful when you do look at it. It's just true. Everything about life and death, it's just so bizarre when you spend time with it, inside poetry, right? Or poetics, other kinds of arts. Yeah, so poetry helps us with paradox by keeping us in the
Ritual.
moment.
Ritual.
Ritual helps us. I meant it keeps us there. If I just say to you, galaxies, atoms, we both might have a moment of, yep, that's crazy. Or, billions of years, and humans have been writing for 10,000. Like,
Right.
but it only lasts a second. I tell you the thing, and we both think about it, and it's over. How do you extend that experience? And
Mhm.
ritual is part of that. It purposefully bores you a little bit. I've heard people say that they get all their ideas in the shower, and it's because it's the only time you're not holding your phone.
Right.
You need to actually be away from input. And when you're bored, other parts of your brain start mixing the things you already know and giving them back to you in different ways. But boredom even can be good because of how it, people in theater know there's ways to make people feel they experienced something, that they went through something. And so ritual helps us deal with paradox by making us know that at certain times of the year, we are going to think about where we are and who we are and what's going on.
Mm.
And religion was doing that for people in a lot of different ways. So many different ways. Any old holiday has a tremendous amount of variation in ritual and meaning and what it addresses. And yeah, then you look at the newer holidays and they have very little. So I even make a list in the book, in the holidays section, where you can sort of look through and say, does this holiday have a beverage? Christmas has eggnog. Does it have colors? A lot of them do. Does it have a plant? A lot of them do. And it's crazy when you start to look at all the does it have a live theater event that people associate with it? Do they have something that you watch on TV that people associate, a movie? A lot of these holidays do. So then you look at a holiday that's a remembrance of the Holocaust or of civil rights, and or beating a certain disease. And there's just nothing in that. I make up the term cabinet of culture for each holiday. Some of them are overflowing and some of them are pretty empty. And if we want to relate to that holiday more, we can purposefully try to associate food, beverage, color, plant. We can try. Historically, it's the weird outlier things that stick. But again, like poetry, like transcendence, putting yourself in poetry or some deep artistic experience, you're setting up the conditions. It may or may not happen, but you're setting up the conditions much better than if you're playing a video game, which I think that it's great that we don't have to be as bored as I used to be when I was young. Before all this technology, I'm okay with it. But it is true that I know many poems by heart, and I learned them because I was bored at the bus stop if I forgot my book. And if I knew the poem by heart, I would just say it to myself. And that was just a totally reasonable thing. And now it seems so strange. We lived in a quieter time, much quieter, right? No one will ever know other than you and me and our age mates.
That's right.
That once upon a time it was very quiet, and now it's very loud. And I take in much less than many people, but I scroll through a bunch of times a day. I don't get involved in anything, partially because I'm an author, and that's there's almost a social code to, some authors jump in, but most keep back a bit. Because we have a different platform like this. People ask us questions. So it seems odd to jump in on the more. Anyway, I don't usually, but that's also because of the trolls, because of the pain of getting that negative experience. So even though I have, so I don't add anything. So that makes me having very much less interaction than most people. And it's already for me a huge part of my life, the scrolling and the YouTube and everything else. I don't play no, I do. I play a video game that just matches shapes to just sort of take care of my head while I'm watching a show. I think it's helpful and good. I'm glad people don't have to be as bored. But if you want to feel something, you absolutely have to take off these wonderful pillows and training wheels and feel it. And boredom is part of it every time. Even going to hear music, you've got to find parking, you've got to walk over there. Boredom and a kind of discomfort. And also sometimes the magic doesn't work. But if you want this, ritual is how religion set it up, that you would hear live music once a year at least. Most religions would do that. That if you think about all the ways, this isn't so big in the Judeo-Christian, in the Abrahamic religions, but Hinduism and many versions of Buddhism have so much go to the river and wash your sins away, go to the river or the monsoon holidays. We don't have any of that, but in my book, I keep including it because no religion has all the interesting, paradoxical, coaxing ideas. So I sort of, as a person who doesn't believe and who has studied religions enough to sort of get my heart out of it a little bit, because I was raised Jewish and I was raised with opinions about all sorts of people like everyone else. But you study religion long enough and ask people, talk to different people long enough, it's your head changes about it. And all the rituals seemed interesting to me. And I love to see, for instance, getting rid of shame, fasting, and water rituals. Those are the two big ones. There are some others, but the variety of the water rituals is big. But just this feeling that you can't, wash your hands by just thinking about it. And if you want to somehow make progress with what's going on inside you, and we all know nothing works like, it's not a supernatural removal of shame. What is it? It's spending a little time really thinking about what you did and processing it, realizing that you've already said you're sorry twice, and, just whatever it is. We have less time to think than anybody in history, probably, right? I
Mhm.
mean, most people were bored most of the time doing
Right.
interesting, sometimes building, but still you had time to think. So I think ritual today might mean more than ever and might work very brief,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
because for us, even a 5-minute break, even shut off your phone for 2 minutes, set it for 2 minutes of meditation. Maybe all of us have tried this, but that's not easy. Even if you have I have a long history of different kinds of meditations, not that I've ever really stuck to it, but I've always been interested, and my parents introduced us to it when we were still kids. The same uh the same one as the Beatles did, the
TM.
Maharishi Yogi. Yeah, did I get that right? No. Yeah, Mahash Yogi. Yeah. Yeah, and we did meditation. I know my first amount of time was 10 minutes, or no, 12 minutes. So I was 12. But yeah, until you get to 20, they go by your age, how many minutes you should meditate. So I know with me, my sister and brother so I grew up doing it and it meant a lot to me. But yeah, today, if I want to meditate, I have to, I have to really set it up, but to just shut off the phone and wait 2 minutes feels like a lot of time. And so, yeah, I think everybody knows that shutting off the phone matters, but I think if we think about it, ritual is one of the few places where we would really frown at somebody from taking out their phone to scroll, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
They might do it, right? It's not the worst thing in the world because we need our phones. We love our phones. Maybe it's something important, but we would frown at the person. And so that means that we understand that someone else's sacred deserves our even our boredom, deserves
Right.
our holding still. And that holding still, I suppose, is part of why, while you're standing there, you do have a moment to think about your own relationship to babies or marriage or, funerals. But religion takes care of things like death, not only at the funeral, but also it has parties like, the Day of the Dead or Halloween, where we are reminded of death, but we're not supposed to be mourning anyone in particular. So it's finally a chance for you to just think about yourself and feel the weirdness and paint your face like a skeleton and look in that mirror and deal with it, you know?
Weirdness is one of your favorite words. So what I hear you saying is that ritual in a certain way is making space for the weird. It's making space for the paradoxical.
That's
It's making
right.
space for, reflecting on what can't be easily articulated or put into words.
Yeah, the noumenal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything that yeah, absolutely. To get away from language as your only relationship to thought is part of it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think what you said sort of sparked that idea of it for me. Yeah, I think and you're asking your brain to shift into another space. And all of this is the opposite of capitalism. We just have to keep
Yeah.
coming back to that. We are in a system that has designs on us,
Yes.
and we've lost our way in talking about the humanities.
Yes.
It's like it seems like even sometimes English teachers can't tell you why. And it's because the culture has lost that sense that the humanities had a kind of what we used to call spiritual aspect to our lives. So we didn't, even if you were going to be a doctor or an engineer, we wanted you to know how to enjoy Shakespeare for your own sake, and for the idea that we would have a kind of reference point with each other to refer to things that are difficult to speak about. But the humanities are shrinking in everywhere. Universities are becoming more like trade schools in a certain way. They're really it's become a more capitalist relationship, and people are thinking more in terms of the job and I know that just because I can see universities shrinking their humanities and arts departments and growing the more job related ones, business, engineering, and med schools. So yeah, we desperately need a new way to talk about the most exciting thing on planet Earth. It is, you know, it is about finding out what turns people's lights on,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and it's the best thing. It's just that we live in capitalism. We don't know what the best thing is. We think we can buy it. And young people are making perfectly reasonable decisions in that context, but it's just not real.
It's not real. So my last question, I could talk to you all day. I don't want
Yeah,
to
it's
keep
fun.
you. The Rumi poem, the saying about there being a crack in everything, and that's where the light gets in. What is the light to you as an agnostic, as an atheist? How do you articulate that?
Well, I suppose that I think it's it's love. It's love. Love is a very strange thing, and I could talk about it in different ways, but the answer really is love. I think that the universe is only experienced in a relational way, that it's only you and I talking, and what happens here, we are making reality, and individual creatures do not, especially herd creatures like us, group creatures like us, individually, I don't think we are anything in a certain way. Once you are educated, I think you can be alone and have a lot of internal relational, but it's not quite the same thing as when you get out and be with people again. There have been philosophers who have looked at this. Levinas is a place to start in terms of the idea that to be is only doable in relational. But I think it's just love. It's all of what we could be talking about when we're talking about transcendence and awe and wonder. They're all a kind of love. They're all that moment of, most of the time, it's an outward experience. I think one can have moments where one has that experience internally, loving oneself, but most of the time, what we've been talking about with transcendence and awe and wonder is a coming out of the importance of all the details of the self and suddenly being out there with everybody else. So what is it? It's love that puts us, appreciation, right? All these things, these words are like appreciation. Love sounds somehow, I don't know, syrupy, but appreciation to the depths of love is what the light is.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Super. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll see you again.